This channel is part of the History Hit network.
On February the 11th, 2013, Pope Benedict XVI made a stunning break with the past, becoming the first leader of the Roman Catholic Church in nearly 600 years to resign. Benedict XVI's decision set in motion an ancient electoral process that unfolded before the global media of the 21st century.
Ad conditionem certam perveni, vires mias, in gravescente aetate, non iam aptas esse ad monus Petrinum eque administrandum.
Io quando ho sentito Ingravescente Etate mi sono sentita male.
When I heard the words Ingravescente Aetate, I was shocked. My brain stopped working and my legs began to tremble. All I knew was that this was a time bomb that was about to go off in my hands.
I heard the Holy Father speaking in Latin. I thought to myself, I must have forgotten my Latin, as I couldn't see the relationship between the canonization ceremony and the words of the Holy Father.
It was the Pope in person who was speaking in front of the united body of cardinals to renounce, and this was totally valid, as it was spoken in the language of the Church, and he specified that he had made this decision after examining his conscience, so the resignation was effective.
The news sent shockwaves around the world.
At that time, I was in the furthest diocese to the east of Cuba when I heard the telephone ring. It was a Cuban student priest who was in Rome, who was calling me to tell me that the Holy Father had resigned.
Speculation began immediately as to why he was stepping down. Some said that it was due to his feeble health and exhausting travel schedule. His last journey was to Cuba.
He did seem a little tired when he arrived in Santiago on his way from Mexico. But when he reached Havana, he didn't seem so tired. He was rather serene.
The last year of Benedict's papacy had been marked by several scandals, which seemed to drain his energy. He ordered 3 prominent cardinals to draw up a secret report on the corruption in the Vatican, which he decided he would hand over personally to his successor. Gianluigi Nuzzi is a journalist who published documents leaked from inside the Vatican, sparking the VatiLeaks scandal.
They are such huge decisions that they are never the result of a single hand or event. That's unthinkable.
This was the first time a pope had resigned since Gregory XII stood down in 1415 to end a rift between opposing popes. Some speculated Pope Benedict had taken inspiration from the early retirement of Celestine V. He was a monk before being elected pope in 1294 and returned to being one 5 months later.
I was surprised but not shocked, because I had noted that he had said, both in an interview, I think with a German man who wrote a book, Out of This World, he mentioned that a day will come when a pope will resign for health reasons or other reasons. And he did lay flowers on the grave of Pope Celestine V, who was the last pope to resign.
Like Celestine, Pope Benedict wanted to retire to a place of quiet meditation, away from the media frenzy. The Roman Curia identified this convent, Mater Ecclesiae, within the Vatican walls. It is the tiny state's only farm.
I think probably wisely he chose to live in the Vatican. He'd be protected. If he went back to Bavaria or I think it could easily be a place of pilgrimage, you know, and I think that would be unhelpful. So I think he'll be protected in the Vatican. He'll live a quiet life, which he wants to do.
History Hit is a streaming platform that is just for history fans, with fantastic documentaries covering fascinating figures and moments in history from all over the world. There is a great collection of religious history content available to History Hit subscribers, from the Crusades to the birth of Islam. There are plenty of topics to choose from for your next documentary fix. We're committed to bringing history fans award-winning documentaries and podcasts that you cannot find anywhere else. Sign up now. Just be sure to use the code PARABLE at checkout.
Benedict made 4 more public appearances. As his last day as Pope approached, Roman Catholics showered him with affection.
Cari fratelli e sorelle, grazie per il vostro affetto.
He denounces the egoism and individualism in the church, and he did that right after resigning. And why did he do this? Because he was asking the cardinals to overcome their own individualism to find unity under a new pope.
On February the 28th, Pope Benedict XVI left the Vatican by helicopter for the country residence at Castel Gandolfo. These rare images show the apartment where he awaited his discreet return to the Vatican. In Rome, the papal apartments were locked and sealed, and the throne of Peter declared vacant.
There's a sense, you know, of incompleteness when you're without a pope, because they can't be without Peter for very long.
8 years had passed since the death of Pope John Paul II.
We still kind of lived in the aura of Pope John Paul II, the long process of his dying and his courage.
With no pope to mourn, Catholic protocols had to change radically. There would be 2 popes in the Vatican, for the first time ever.
Well, I mean, obviously, if you are specialized in covering the Vatican, you can't miss the point that these are monumentally amazing days that we're living through. You know, I mean, when you cover an institution that has more than 2,000 years of history, you don't get a chance to use words like uncharted waters very often, but that is very much where we are.
Benedict's resignation set in motion a most ancient ritual, still cloaked in mystery. During the 2 weeks that followed, the Catholic Church's most influential leaders met in the Vatican Hall of Audiences and then in the secret conclave to elect a new pope. The man they chose was, like everything else in this conclave, extraordinary. The identity of the new pope came as a total surprise. He was the first non-European in 1,300 years, and the first member of the Jesuit order to be given such power. It was a stunning break with the past.
He was 76, and people would say we better have a younger pope and so on. But no, this man seemed to have those qualities which were recognized, and I think that was the grace of the Holy Spirit.
On March the 19th, 2013, just 5 weeks after Pope Benedict had announced his resignation, a new pope was installed as the spiritual leader of the world's largest organized faith. This archbishop from far-flung Argentina now pushed the 2,000-year-old institution into the modern world. After Pope Benedict left office on February the 28th, 2013, ancient church protocols were dusted off to prepare for these most mysterious elections. Speculation was rampant, and bookmakers took bets on who would come out Pope.
An Irish bookmaker, Paddy Power, is taking bets on who will be named.
We don't see this as sinful or anything. For us, it's just entertainment. And we've been running a money-back special in which if the cardinals elected a black pope, we would refund all losing bets. So we were putting our neck on the line for upwards of $1 million had they elected someone like Cardinal Turkson of Ghana. Thankfully, our prayers were answered and the money-back special didn't click.
Behind the scenes, clerical tailors Gamarelli were working hard to prepare the 3 papal robes of different sizes to fit whichever cardinal was elected. The company has served the popes, once powerful princes as well as spiritual leaders, for 300 years.
Serving a king or an emperor is always a good thing. Also because since he chose us, he's clearly very happy.
Clerical clothing was standardized 1,000 years ago, and the Gamarelli family still owns and restores ancient robes.
The cassock never changes. The shape of the person can change, the height or width, but the design is always the same. It's very nice to see the evolution of these priests who come here to get their first cassock for their ordination, and then, over time, become monsignori, bishops, and sometimes even cardinals.
As the conclave neared, the Gamarelli tailors proudly exhibited in their shop windows the robes that would soon hang in the Hall of Tears, awaiting the new leader of the Roman Catholic Church. Since the earliest times of Christianity, the Pope has been both a political and spiritual leader. When a Pope dies, the Camerlengo removes from the deceased pontiff's hand the papal sign of office, the fisherman's ring, and smashes it, along with the seal of office. In 2013, Cardinal Tarcisio Bertone was the all-powerful Vatican Secretary of State and Camerlengo. It was he who personally placed the seals on the papal apartments. Fabrizio Mastrofini is a journalist at Vatican Radio and keen Vatican watcher.
The seals were placed on the papal apartments on the 3rd floor of the Apostolic Palace, but not at Castel Gandolfo, because the Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI went to stay at Castel Gandolfo.
Benedict's resignation would be the first of many departures from tradition in the coming weeks.
We've already had one massive shock. I mean, nobody saw Benedict XVI's resignation coming. We now live in a world in which everything seems a little more possible.
The tradition of electing a pope goes back to the very origins of Christianity in the Roman Empire. Shutting away cardinals to elect a pope secretly is a consequence of 1,000 years of power struggles between political and spiritual leaders. The first Christian missionary to Rome was St. Peter the Apostle. For 300 years, the Christians in Rome remained united under a local leader elected by his followers. In 313, Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity, and the bishops of Rome gained political power. The Church survived the fall of the Roman Empire, and in the centuries that followed, the popes became cultural and political powerhouses. As God's representatives on earth, popes could make or break kingdoms and empires. Having a pope who could confer divine authority on kings and emperors was vital to medieval society. In order to avoid outside influence during the election, cardinals would be physically isolated, sometimes even locked up, hence the word conclave, from the Latin cum clave, with a key. Elections were held wherever a pope died, and 5 times they took place in Perugia, a city close to Rome. It was here that a divided college of cardinals elected an obscure and saintly monk to become pope.
In Perugia, in a Perugian conclave in 1294, the hermit Pietro Morone of Isernia was where he was born, was elected pope, and he took the name Celestine V.
Celestine V ruled only 5 months before resigning. The next 2 popes died violent deaths. Benedict XI was poisoned here in Perugia.
Perugia had a bad reputation for this because they would often use a poison, lead acetate, called Perugia water, which was anything but water.
Perugia's ancient cathedral still holds artifacts of the conclaves, including a mass grave containing the remains of 5 popes, and this throne, designed to resemble the folding stool of Roman generals. The last conclave held here brought disaster to the Church. The new pope was French and moved the Holy See to Avignon in France. Today, cardinals come from all over the world and represent a global faith with its 1.2 billion members. But for 2,000 years, they were mostly Italians who acted as the closest aides to the Bishop of Rome. Today, the Church's global reach is paired with the ancient traditions of the past, when each cardinal is asked to preside over a local church in Rome.
The reason why you're an elector is because you're a parish priest in Rome. In the old church, in the ancient church, the Bishop of Rome was elected by the parish priests. And so that custom continues, that when you're made a cardinal, you're given a church in Rome to be the titular parish priest. And so there's a sense in which the first aim of the cardinals is not we're electing a pope, but we're electing the Bishop of Rome.
It is only rare that the cardinals from across the globe return to the church they have been assigned to in Rome. But on March the 10th, 2013, the cardinals exceptionally said masses in these churches, offering a rare public glimpse of the men who were about to disappear into the Sistine Chapel to elect a pope. The number of cardinals has grown from just a handful in the Middle Ages to 180 today, with a limit of 120 electors, who have to be under 80 years of age. These ancient engravings show the whole process of papal election, from the passing of the Pope to the election of a new one. The cardinals were required to sleep in cubicles close to the conclave hall, until Pope John Paul II had a hostel built for them inside the Vatican walls. As cardinals gathered in Rome, the Church faced its worst crisis in decades and had to address huge problems, including pedophilia, the Vatican Bank, and infighting within the Vatican government, known as the Curia.
During the congregations, they call them, the meetings that took place at the cardinals, all the cardinals, for nearly a week, every morning we were speaking, and cardinals were speaking very openly, very honestly about what the challenges facing the Church, but the qualities needed in the new Pope.
The North American delegation called for greater transparency and began holding daily press briefings.
And our bishops are expected not merely to do TV and print interviews, but to be on Twitter and to be on Facebook and to be sort of ubiquitous. I mean, there's a sense in which they're not only shepherds of souls, but they're media celebrities. They are the National Bishops' Conference that has done the best job of making their cardinals available to the press. They're organizing briefings here at the North American College to sort of feed the beast.
The church hierarchy wanted only the Vatican's official spokesman to deliver information to the outside world, and the North American cardinals were forced to stop. It seemed the Vatican apparatus was taking a step backwards towards the Middle Ages.
The need emerged for there to be better communications between the Holy See, that is to say, the Church in Rome, and the cardinals out of Rome.
The anti-pedophilia pressure group SNAP issued a list of 12 cardinals they called the Dirty Dozen, whom they opposed as potential popes due to what the group claimed was their ambiguous attitude towards abuse.
We've looked at some of the track records, and there's certainly some who we were very, very worried about.
I think it's critical to the cardinals that whoever they pick have clean hands, that is, not be carrying any baggage from the sex abuse scandal, because they know that if they're going to turn a corner, the last thing they want is for the day one story about the new pope to be cloud of sex abuse hangs over Rome.
The question was, who best was suited to carry out the massive reforms needed?
There is always talk of the profile of the next pope, and whoever he is will always be a surprise. The person elected and the profile that he will have during his pontificate can simply not be imagined beforehand.
Che avrà durante il tempo del suo pontificato non si può immaginare.
The problem of who will be the next Holy Father isn't a geographical issue. For example, and I've said this many times, Peter wasn't Roman.
Many hoped the conclave would not drag on.
If the conclave were to last a long time, it would give a bad impression and cause even greater confusion.
It had been 35 years since an Italian had been pope. Many thought that an Italian cardinal might be chosen, and Archbishop of Milan, Angelo Scola, was the front runner. African cardinals, such as Cardinal Larenzi of Nigeria, also had a high profile. Some thought it was time for a North American. Latin America, however, is the world's most Catholic continent.
In Latin America, yes, of course, it's 44% of the Catholics in the world. But at the same time, Latin America is the continent where we have the largest social gaps.
The growing diversity of the Roman Catholic Church would prove a key factor in the upcoming papal election. The Sistine Chapel was carefully being readied to host the 115 cardinals who would choose the next pope. Amidst the breathtaking frescoes by Michelangelo, the ancient chapel was being transformed into a magnificent stage for the dramatic election of one of the most powerful men in the world.
There is a careful preparation of the floor of the Sistine Chapel, because the Sistine Chapel has an uneven floor since it is a chapel, a church to all intents and purposes. So the floor is leveled out. A false floor is created to make it even, so as not to create problems for the cardinals.
Other items have to be prepared too. The stove that burns the ballots is one of the most important physical items in the whole conclave. It is connected by a series of copper tubes to the legendary chimney that protrudes from the roof of the Sistine Chapel. It is here that the voting cards are burned with a chemical mixture that gives off black smoke when there is no 2/3 majority, or white smoke when a pope has been elected. Although with 60 cardinals the Europeans were proportionally the largest group, a 20-strong delegation from the United States and 13 from Latin America seemed to change the balance of cultural interests within the voting body. On March the 12th, 2013, the College of all the 180 cardinals held an elaborate mass in St. Peter's Basilica and prayed with faithful from all over the world for the election of the new pope. 115 cardinals then made their way to the nearby Sistine Chapel, where they would vote 4 times a day until they agreed on one man to rule over the Roman Catholic Church. The conclave ritual has developed over the millennia. For centuries, cardinals have sworn to keep what happens inside secret. Once the cardinals had taken the oath of silence, the master of ceremonies ordered extra omnes, literally, all out. The doors were closed. Outside, in St. Peter's Square, excitement hung in the air.
They are sitting on their chairs, which are quite narrow. They have to write the name of the person they have chosen, and then in a pre-established order, they have to walk all the way down the chapel and deposit the card in the voting urn.
The voting rules require a 2/3 majority of electors to decide on one name. The winning candidate needed 77 votes.
Everything about it is dramatic. First of all, the Sistine Chapel, which you don't always see in such detail, in the sense you've got plenty of time to look around, and with Michelangelo's paintings, frescoes from Adam and Eve to the Last Judgment. It's simply stunning.
You're in liturgical garb because it's a liturgy, it's choreographed. There's little difference, as you can imagine, if you know the difference between the personality of Cardinal Ratzinger and the personality of Cardinal Ray, but the script is the same.
For 2 days, the cardinals prayed and voted in the Sistine Chapel, breaking only for lunch and dinner, when they were transported by bus from the chapel to their hostel along this route around the back of St. Peter's Basilica. They were assisted by a number of lay personnel who were also sworn to secrecy. Outside in St. Peter's Square, there were church groups, associations, and pilgrims from around the world. As the ballots came and went, the square filled up with the curious and the faithful, waiting for a sign.
Put Dennis Rodman in a Pope-mobile. So we've built an exact replica of Benedict's Pope-mobile, and we've been parading him around St. Peter's.
The first 2 ballots in the afternoon of the 12th produced only dark black smoke. The next 2 ballots on the morning of the 13th also signaled that no pope had been elected. Speculation was rampant about what power struggles might be unfolding inside.
It's a very prayerful time for all of us. It's a quiet time. You pray and you vote. You pray and you vote, basically. You can talk quietly if you want to the people next to you, but they're always the same people because you're seated in order of precedence. Next to me on my left is always the Archbishop of Mexico City. Next to him, the Archbishop of Vienna. And over on this side, well, the cardinal who used to be the Archbishop of Lviv in the Ukraine has died, so I have another Polish cardinal now next to me.
The voting system is laborious and antiquated, but has always worked, having guaranteed the election of 266 popes. There are 4 ballots per day, 2 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. After each of the 2 sessions, the ballot papers are burned. The key officials, chosen by lot from the 115 cardinals, are the 3 scrutineers who count the votes. When a ballot begins, each cardinal is given a number of cards with the Latin words "Eligo in summum pontificem" and a space at the bottom to write in their candidate. One by one, they swear to have voted according to conscience as they place the card on a plate covering the voting urn and then tip it in.
And you say before God, I believe this man is the man I would choose to be the next pope, and you put and then you walk back. That takes about 20 minutes before they all have done it. So you go back to your seat and you pray or you talk to your neighbors and you wait.
You examine your own motives. Am I doing this for self-interest? Am I doing it just for the interest of my own church? Am I doing it for the interest of my own culture or people? Or am I doing it because I believe he's the best one for the universal church? So there's an examination of conscience, even as you vote, which is designed to set you free. And then you also have to ask, is he free to govern the universal church?
Once voting is complete, the cards are counted, read, and votes counted by the 3 scrutineers.
And then the scrutineers, who are sitting in 3 cardinals, one takes out the vote and then passes it to another, and then it's read out. And so all the 115 votes the candidates who are voted for are read out. And of course, we all listen with great avidity, you know, what's happening? How many votes did so-and-so get? And then you begin again. You have 2 votes at a time.
So you try to do it with the Lord. You can't second guess the Lord, and you know, but you try to be open to the promptings of the Spirit of the Lord. And I felt that as you watch the votes and you change your own votes, etc., you think, is this now where I'm supposed to go?
If there is no 2/3 majority, then the cards are tied together, recounted, and burned. A chemical mixture is added to make the smoke turn the blackest black, so there is no confusion about the outcome.
After the 4th vote, when one particular cardinal was getting near the 77 they needed, well, I've rarely had such a dramatic situation. You could have heard a pin drop. 70, he had to get 77 votes. And eventually he reached 77, and there was a stillness. And then some people started clapping, but then they had to carry on with the voting.
The cardinals are ordinary people, and some are smarter than others, and some are talented in other ways, but basically it's a pretty pedestrian group of people in some ways. And yet when the man is chosen and he accepts, because he's not Pope until he accepts, all of a sudden the relationships shift, and you see something in him that you didn't see before.
This is the moment when an ordinary cardinal accepts this extraordinary position. When he gets to choose the name his papacy will be remembered by throughout history.
The senior cardinal went up to the then Cardinal Ratzinger and said, "Do you accept to become the Supreme Pontiff of the Catholic Church?" And he said, "I accept as the will of God." And then, "What name do you take?" He said, "Benedict." And immediately he's Pope. I mean, there's no ritual, he is Pope from that very moment.
When he chose the name Francis, I was totally surprised, because it's not a Roman name. It's an Italian name, but it's not a Roman name. You know, it's not Gregory and Pius and Benedict. And so that's my name. It's my given name. And I couldn't believe it.
Cardinal Jorge Bergoglio chose the name Francis, after St. Francis of Assisi, defender of the poor and downtrodden. He is the first pope ever to do so.
After that moment when he is elected and he comes back clothed as Pope, we all go up and greet him one by one and say a few things. I spoke in Spanish, then Santo Padre, me llamo Francis también, you know, my name is Francis too. And he just laughed, and he said, "I know, Francis, Jorge and George."
What for Catholics a Pope means, he's not just added on to the Church, he's actually an integral part of being a Catholic, part, if you like, of one's faith, because we believe that Jesus left Peter and the apostles to continue that teaching, and that's what happens today. Peter and the bishops continue that.
So it took a long time, and it so happened that we ended up with a Pope from South America, from Argentina, who is a well-known cardinal, but not a cardinal who's very active here in Rome. He's very concerned about governing Buenos Aires and being with the poor there.
A secret, 1,000-year-old ritual had just produced a new pope. His name took the world by surprise. Jorge Mario Bergoglio was the first non-European to be elected to lead the Roman Catholic Church in more than 1,000 years. As he himself said, his brother cardinals had gone to the other side of the world to find a new leader. Pope Francis came from the far-flung diocese of Buenos Aires. The election process had taken less than 2 weeks.
Pope Benedictus was looking around Europe and was Europe-minded. This Pope surely is going to be Latin American-minded, but then the Church is going to be Latin American-minded and have the priorities needed in Latin America and to be spread to the rest of the world.
With the election, he became the pastor of the city of Rome and would have to install a new government. The task that lay ahead was massive.
The man does not possess the office possesses the man. So he is, Benedict was very clear on this. You know, it's not my job to change the teaching, it's my job to explain it and pass it on.
The first steps of the new pope will be the first appointments, and then the first Mass, the inaugural Mass, and here too, on the basis of what he will say, we will have some indication of his future policies and where he wants to go.
Pope Francis was now the ruler of the tiny Vatican City and Bishop of Rome, the supreme moral authority in the Roman Catholic world.
Non-Catholics may not believe in everything the Pope says, whatever, but they do think that the election of a Pope is a significant event in the moral consensus of the world. And that what he says, they may accept it or not, but what he says is important. Somehow he's a moral arbiter.
He's a man of the people, and he doesn't like, should we say, all the luxuries or the gold that is related with a curia. He likes to ride the ordinary bus.
The new Pope, known for his austere lifestyle and simple ways, refused to live in the lavish papal apartments that popes have occupied for more than 150 years. Instead, he preferred a small apartment in the Sancta Marta hostel where the cardinals had been lodged during the conclave. It was just the beginning of what was to become a radical new style of church governance. On March the 19th, 2013, in an inauguration ceremony beamed to screens the world over, Pope Francis celebrated his very first Mass. The symbology of the ceremony was already a clear sign of the Pope's new style. By receiving a new fisherman's ring, he became the 266th Pope and Bishop of Rome. His simple robes marked a radical departure from his predecessor's archaic, elaborate appearance. The papal tiara, which once represented the Pope's triple authority as Supreme Pontiff, Vicar of Christ, and Ruler of men, had been abandoned by Pope Paul VI in 1963. The new Pope's simplicity was to set the tone for a new era in the Vatican.
He said the church should go back to the people and the poor. And he's been showing that. He won't use those red shoes. He's still, you know, stepping on his old, worn-out shoes. He chose that name, Francis.
For the first time ever, now 2 popes lived in the Vatican. On the 2nd of May 2013, the Pope Emeritus, Benedict, returned to the Vatican from Castel Gandolfo and took up residence in the convent Mater Ecclesiae. He handed the secret report on corruption in the Vatican to his successor, as promised.
Pope Benedict's a very intelligent and wise man. He won't try and influence his successor, and this man certainly will not be influenced in that way.
Although the 2 popes were dressed similarly, there was one almost imperceptible difference between their white robes.
Emeritus Pope Benedict will be allowed to wear white, but without the little cloak that covers the Pope's shoulders, which is a sign of being a bishop, in this case, the Bishop of Rome.
Unlike his predecessor, Benedict XVI, Pope Francis seems uncomfortable with the ornate and ceremonial trappings of Vatican life, a far cry from his humble immigrant upbringing and the approachable, down-to-earth style he was used to in his native Buenos Aires. Pope Francis established an open and simple style of leadership of the Roman Catholic Church right from the day of his inauguration.
I think it is very positive that Pope Francis is 76-year-old. He's not an old man. He's a man that has a lot of experience and has looked the last 10 years what has been going on with the Vatican, with the Church.
Strong calls from several quarters to reform the inner workings of the government of the Holy See will undoubtedly lead to change.
If he reminds us all that the Church is Catholic, it's universal, and that the poor are the first in the kingdom of God, and then he does necessary moves to assure that the governance of the Church is more efficient and is more transparent, that'll have a lot of impact.
Pope Francis responded to criticism of the Curia by calling 8 cardinals to Rome and setting up a commission to study the reforms. Among them, Cardinal O'Malley, Archbishop of Boston, and Cardinal Bettello, President of the Vatican City-State Governorate.
The new Pope is free to do what he wants, but he is morally bound to follow the indications of the other cardinals, expressed during the Congregation of Cardinals.
Jorge Mario Bergoglio is a traditionalist. He has been against abortion, gay marriage, against euthanasia. But on the other hand, he is very, should we say, progressive in the way he addresses what the Church should do in the day-to-day fields or bases.
Because the Jesuits have a tradition of being obedient towards the Church and towards the Pope, not of taking a role of responsibility to themselves, this is the characteristic of the Society of Jesus that has made the choice of a Jesuit Pope impossible until today.
His mission as the leader of the Roman Catholic Church appears more focused on representing people from all economic backgrounds, especially in Latin America.
Pope Francis is talking about re-evangelizing the Catholics that have forgotten the basics of what Catholicism is.
300 million Roman Catholics live in Latin America. It is a continent that is also marked by rapid social change and extensive poverty.
If you go to the provinces, if you go to Mesopotamia in the northeast or to the northwest, where you get all the Inca stream and all these indigenous tribes, then you can see this, should we say, synthetic way of living, being a Catholic, and you get like indigenous traditions intermingling with a classical way of being a Catholic.
The Vatican, the smallest sovereign state in the world, is the beating heart of the Roman Catholic Church. If the first months of this papacy are any gauge, the enthusiasm of Latin American Catholics and the common touch of Pope Francis has quickened its pulse and hastened the pace of change.
Issue that's been ignored.
Benedict ordered an investigation into the scandals. A report was delivered in December 2012. The mysterious contents of that dossier remain one of Italy's best-kept secrets. The Vatican spokesman, Father Federico Lombardi, informed the media.
The Pope has established that the report will be available to his successor. This, let's say, is the content, and he confirms the fact that the contents of the report have not been revealed to others. so it is known only to those who wrote it and to himself.
Despite chaos in the Curia, Pope Benedict made one last pastoral journey to Latin America, where a third of the globe's Roman Catholics live.
First, he was invited by Fidel Castro, and then by Raúl Castro. The choice of our country for his visit to Latin America, and as his last journey, is, in itself, very significant.
In se stesso molto significativa.
For him, 85, 86, getting feebler, and he had been with Pope John Paul the last years of his life when really he could do nothing, and there were a lot of cardinals I knew who thought maybe he should resign. You know, after 2000, and I saw him once or twice then, and certainly he wasn't capable of ruling the church.
Benedict chose to spend the rest of his life here, within the Vatican walls, in this convent specially restored as his new living quarters. As the day of his departure approached, his last appearances did little to lift the veil of mystery over why he stepped down. On the 28th of February 2013, Benedict left the Vatican to take up temporary residence at Castel Gandolfo, the papal summer palace. Cardinal Bertone, the Vatican's Secretary of State and all-powerful administrator, locked and sealed the doors to the pontiff's apartments and declared the throne vacant. The cardinals of the Catholic Church soon descended on Rome to elect a new pope and confront the institution's worst crisis in decades. In Buenos Aires, Cardinal Jorge Bergoglio, known for his humble lifestyle, took the metro homewards to prepare for his trip to Rome. The sound of his favorite music filled the air as Argentinians tangoed the night away, unaware that the world's spotlight would soon be turned upon them. Pope Benedict appeared in public for the last time in Castel Gandolfo, where he saluted the crowds before retreating from the Vatican stage.
Padre e Figlio e Spirito Santo. Grazie, buonanotte.
8 years had passed since the death of his predecessor, the charismatic John Paul II.
4 million people, you know, were here. It was just incredible for his funeral, and it was very moving. It was very dramatic, and even the conclave, which sort of followed, was a much quieter affair.
Benedict XVI, a soft-spoken German intellectual, seemed unable to control the powerful lobbies within the Vatican government, known as the Curia. Fabrizio Mastrofini is a reporter at Vatican Radio.
Ratzinger came from the Roman Curia before becoming Pope. He had worked there for 20 years, but in the end he proved unable to be fully in control of its inner workings.
As Catholic leaders arrived in Rome, pressure groups soon followed. So did the bookmakers.
Pope Benedict, you know, let us not forget, goes back 500 years. It's old as the conclave itself. You know, back in 1513, so 500 years ago, they were betting on the conclave around Leo X. The big banks were running the sort of books between them, and they had sort of minions scurrying between the two with the updated odds. So we're not doing anything new here.
Members of a victims association, the survivors' network of those abused by priests, also arrived in Rome to make their voices heard.
Until we see the Pope defrocking bad bishops, and until we see the secular justice system jailing bad bishops, then things aren't going to change. And this isn't about being punitive. This is about deterring the cover-ups of child sex crimes.
A remarkably open discussion focused on some thorny issues, such as whether some cardinals in the conclave had covered up abuse. Yet another scandal hit the headlines. Cardinal Keith O'Brien, Archbishop of Edinburgh, resigned after admitting inappropriate sexual behavior towards young priests.
I believe that Cardinal O'Brien has released a declaration on his own behalf in Scotland. At least I see that it is being talked about. This is of another jurisdiction. As far as we are concerned, we have the acceptance by the Holy Father of the resignation of the government of the Diocese of Edinburgh.
The US cardinals broke with tradition and began holding their own press conferences every day after the Congregation of Cardinals. The Curia later asked them to stop. However, the North American College remained a powerhouse for change.
In the old days, the idea was you can't have an American pope because that would be a superpower pope. And, you know, America already has too much power, and everybody would think the CIA had taken control of the Vatican and so on. But, you know, these days, America is no longer the only superpower in the world. The calculus has changed.
Finally, a conclave date was set for March the 12th. As each cardinal is also the parish priest of a church in Rome, they all went to their parishes in the city to say Mass. It was their last campaign push. Austrian Cardinal Christoph Schönborn of Vienna even held his own press conference.
Das, was man von Franziskus gesagt hat, musste nicht.
As St. Francis said, but of course St. Francis did not become Pope. He did not want to. What we're looking for is a man of the gospel. This, I believe, is the deciding question.
On the morning of March the 12th, 180 cardinals celebrated a Mass to pray that all would go well in the conclave about to commence. Under heavy rain and dark skies, 115 cardinal electors, all those under the age of 80, entered the Sistine Chapel to a litany of saints. They swore an oath of secrecy. The doors were ceremoniously closed. 2/3 of the 115 cardinals would have to agree in order to elect a new pope. Speculation over who would get the 77 votes required was feverish.
We'll look at their strengths and their experiences, things like what country they're from, the policy that they've headed up, where they sit in the church, obviously their theological views. Do they have an active Twitter following? It's almost a prerequisite these days. And then from there, we let the market decide.
Archbishop of Milan, Angelo Scola, was the front runner. As Archbishop of the world's largest diocese and former Patriarch of Venice, he was seen as the man who could reform the church from the inside.
Angelo Scola is well known, especially in Italy. He is close to the theology of Joseph Ratzinger.
Scola started off about 15 to 1 in the betting. He was quickly cut to about 2 or 3 to 1 after we saw a lot of money for him. Take someone like Cardinal Renzi from Nigeria, started off, one of the front runners, 2 to 3 to 1, quickly moved out to sort of 50 to 1 after we didn't see much money on him.
There are many who have pointed to Cardinal Timothy Dolan of New York, who is this kind of media-savvy freak of nature, as one possibility. Some have talked about Cardinal Sean O'Malley of Boston, who is a profiler on the sexual abuse scandals that have been such a cancer for the Catholic Church.
Those who expected a Latin American pope saw a potential leader in Odilo Scherer, Archbishop of Sao Paulo in Brazil.
It seems that during the congregations before the conclave, Cardinal Scherer defended the workings of the Roman Curia, as opposed to the other cardinals who criticized the Roman Curia.
We hope that the next Pope will have Mexico and the whole of Latin America in his heart.
As the faithful and the curious descended on Rome, a circus-like atmosphere permeated St. Peter's Square.
It would be very nice, I think, if the new Pope be like Francis I, or Francis, both in name and in his approach, and the things he does, following his teaching.
Inside the conclave, tension was mounting as the ballots came and went.
You'd ask, well, what do you think, etc. So you never ask people how you vote, but who do you think would be a strong, or you ask somebody about somebody else. You do that quite often. You ask a Brazilian, what do you know about Cardinal, Scherer. You ask Cardinal Kerlik, who's a good friend, who's retired now in Paraná in Argentina, what about Cardinal Bergoglio?
All over the world, men and women prayed for a pope who could address the many different challenges facing the Church.
When you reach 77, then you know you have elected a pope. Whether he'll accept is another question. But that's a moment when everybody, you can just hear a kind of a collective sigh of relief, and people applauded, and then they finished the tally, of course, they must.
I think the election of a pope is extraordinary, it's quick. You know, the death of one pope or the resignation of a pope, within a fortnight, 3 weeks, you've got a new one. It's pretty quick. When you think of elections in countries, they go on and on. In the United States, or indeed in Germany, they're at it for months.
He comes back clothed in white, and then we all listen to the proto-deacon of the College of Cardinals facing that great mural of the Last Judgment. When Christ returns in glory to judge the living and the dead, and the Pope is there, and he's listening to the 16th chapter of the Gospel according to St. Matthew, where he hears the words, Jesus telling Peter, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. And only 266 men have ever heard those words directed to them personally.
Finally, white smoke signaled that the cardinals had reached the 2/3 quorum and chosen their man. Bells rang across Rome, and quickly St. Peter's Square filled with a large crowd gathered to hear the news. The proto-deacon stepped out onto the balcony to announce the new Pope's name in Latin.
Habemus Papam.
Jorge Mario Bergoglio was the Cardinal Archbishop of Buenos Aires and had been the runner-up to Joseph Ratzinger in the previous conclave. It was the first time in 1,000 years that a non-European had been elected as the leader of the Roman Catholic Church, and the first time a Jesuit had been elevated to the office. It signaled radical change.
The choice was, I think, one that we took a long time to discern, trying to do what God wants for the Church. And sometimes in the reports, people assume motivations based upon geography, where you're from, based upon ideology. But those don't play a large role.
I didn't have in my mind this man, Pope Francis. And I don't think any of the other cardinals, or at least very few of them, did. And it was during the congregations, they call them, the meetings that took place at the cardinals, all the cardinals, for nearly a week. I think that gradually you could see the portrait of someone. And I think it centered eventually on this man they hadn't thought of.
His adopted name, Pope Francis, was inspired by St. Francis of Assisi, defender of the poor and downtrodden. The message to the world was clear. White smoke billowing from a copper chimney was a sign to the world that one of its most powerful leaders had been chosen in the secrecy of the Sistine Chapel. The cardinal's choice fell on Jorge Mario Bergoglio, the Archbishop of Buenos Aires. The enthusiastic crowd celebrated the new pope, even though his election had come as a surprise to all. Carolina Barros is the editor of the Buenos Aires Herald and has followed Cardinal Bergoglio's career.
He didn't expect to be elected Pope if you look at the way he bought his ticket. He had a full trip ticket and he was meant to be back on the 23rd. He'll be staying in Rome forever.
The future Pope Francis grew up in this middle-class suburb of Buenos Aires called Flores, more than 11,000 kilometers away from Rome. Now almost completely rebuilt, this is the house where he was brought up by a family of Italian immigrants. Just round the corner is his primary school. Nuestra Señora de la Misericordia was his middle school, and these were the places he played and prayed as a devout Catholic boy.
Here he played football when he was a small boy, 5 years old. When he was bigger, he played football with his friends in the square.
He was a vivacious child, known for his special charm.
There was another sister who died at 110 years of age, and he'd ask, "What was I like when I was a kid?" And she'd answer, "A little devil." The sister was wonderful. She was immensely attached to him.
He was a devout boy, and it is reported that when one of his lungs had to be removed due to a serious infection, he found strength in his faith. He entered the Jesuit seminary aged 20, studied chemistry, and became a priest at 33. The Jesuits are one of the most powerful religious orders in the Catholic Church, and he was appointed their superior in Argentina, aged just 37.
Society of Jesus has been traditionally and a long history very, very politically minded, and they know how to deal with politics and power.
Archbishop Bergoglio worked closely with Father Gustavo Carrara, a Jesuit engaged in frontline missionary work in the slums of Buenos Aires.
The priests, courageous priests, worked in this area during the dictatorship, pushing forward community creation. Today, our work moves forward in the same spirit, although the challenges are very different today, because now these areas are more structured than before, and our idea is how do we integrate these areas into the wider city?
In 1976, a military junta seized power and proceeded to kidnap and murder thousands of people, among them those who preached the gospel as a manifesto of social justice. The actions of the Roman Catholic leadership during the so-called Dirty War are the subject of heated criticism, some of it aimed directly at Jorge Bergoglio. As head of the Jesuits in Argentina, he was responsible for 2 priests who were kidnapped in the Bajo Flores slum in Buenos Aires. Their story is intimately connected with the tragic death of Monica Mignone, a devout Catholic teacher and volunteer who worked with them. Mercedes Mignone is her sister.
On the 14th of May, 1976, about 5 in the morning, the bell began ringing insistently. They were from the armed forces. They told Monica to get dressed. They told her not to take any money, that they had come to collect her to answer some questions about a friend of hers, and that 2 hours later she would come back.
Fathers Francisco Jalix and Orlando Jorio were Jesuit priests who worked with Monica. They were kidnapped a week later in the shanty towns where the destitute of Buenos Aires lived and where urban guerrillas found refuge.
Then, more or less a week later, they went to the slum of Bajo Flores, and there they took away 2 priests, Jalix and Jorio, and a group of catechism teachers.
Monica's father was determined to find out what had happened to her. He discovered that she and the priests had been taken to this detention center. the infamous School for Naval Mechanics, or ESMA, where dozens of detainees died under the dictatorship.
When my father found out what the situation was, also with Shalix and Chorio, Montes, who was a member of the military at the time, said, "Oh, but it's the Navy that has them." And a few days later, the two priests reappeared. And we think that in this case, in this situation, the fact that our father found out has a lot to do with the fact that they were freed.
Jorge Bergoglio, however, says it was he who intervened with high-ranking Admiral Emilio Massera to have them released. He testified to this effect before an inquest in 2005.
Bueno, mire, Massera, yo quiero que aparezcan. Me levanté y me fui.
What happened to these two Jesuit priests, seen here saying Mass with their superior, Bergoglio, is at the heart of the criticism leveled at the new Pope by one of Argentina's leading journalists, Horacio Verbitsky.
This is a document which, in 1979, Bergoglio delivered to the government of the dictatorship asking for the renewal of Jalix's passport. In this second document is the recommendation of the official who received it, rejecting the request.
Although these documents are not signed by Jorge Bergoglio himself, the government official claims that his decision was based on Bergoglio's reports.
In the third document, the same official with the same signature explains what the reasons are, and they are exactly the same as what Jalix and Llorio said Bergoglio was saying about them. Subversive activity in female religious institutes, conflicts of obedience, detainment in the Navy School for Mechanics. They weren't detained, they were kidnapped, which is not the same. He was accused with Father Llorio of suspected contact with guerrillas. These documents were delivered to us by Father Bergoglio himself.
30,000 young men and women were kidnapped, tortured, and murdered during Argentina's dirty war. Human rights campaigner Emilio Mignone would discover just how ambiguous the church hierarchy was.
This is my mother, Angelica Sosa de Mignone, and Nora Portinhas. They went to ask the Pope what had happened to their children. But the church, or rather the hierarchy of the church, did nothing.
La iglesia nunca, o sea, la jerarquía de la iglesia nunca se ocupó.
Shortly after Jorge Bergoglio's election as Pope, Father Jalix released a statement saying he had no further comment on Bergoglio's role in this matter. Some say Bergoglio's silent diplomacy may have actually saved lives, but not everyone is convinced. The grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo are among his critics. They are still searching for 400 children born in captivity.
Complicity is either by action or by omission. There were those who acted openly and straightforwardly in favor of the dictatorship, such as the bishop, and there are those who looked the other way and did nothing and did not help us, and that was by omission. They have responsibility, because up to this point, Monsignor Bergoglio has said nothing about the desaparecidos.
Monica Mignone never returned. The grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo, meanwhile, have successfully identified 108 grandchildren born in captivity who were placed in foster homes but have since been reintroduced to their biological families.
We estimate that around 30,000 people were kidnapped during the dictatorship, and among them 500 babies, of whom we have found 108. Now they are grown men and women.
108. Ya son hombres y mujeres ahora. That period when the church would go to the slums, but on the other hand, would keep quiet on what was going on, was in a way sent to the archives, and nobody wanted to talk about that. Jorge Mario Bergoglio thinks that the church should be caring of the poor people.
That dedication to the poor is clear here in the very church where Monica Mignoni used to work with Fathers Jalix and Giorgio. This is where her sister was married.
The typical inhabitant of this slum is the laborer, the worker, the woman who wants a better life for her children and has to leave them to work outside the home.
The barrio of Bajo Flores is on the southern outskirts of the city. These teenagers are traveling across the city to participate in a special mass for two young men about to enter the local seminary. The celebration is an expression of the fervent popular Catholic culture that thrives here. Many of the inhabitants of the slums are immigrants from neighboring countries, such as Bolivia. They bring with them their own traditions. By engaging with the poor of the slums, the Archbishop Jorge Bergoglio came to know intimately the realities of wider Latin America.
In the barrio on the other side, they hold the very popular feast of the Virgin of Copacabana, who is the patron saint of Bolivia. And here, there are many people who have immigrated from Bolivia. It's a festivity that attracts more than 30,000 people who come from the different areas of the city and Greater Buenos Aires to venerate the image of the Virgin and dance their native dances.
Jorge Bergoglio's opposition to liberation theology won him the favor of Pope John Paul II, who first made him Archbishop of Buenos Aires and then a cardinal.
He's very straightforward, very authentic, a man of great integrity, because he's been pastor when it's been difficult for the church. And so you have to kind of find your way in that. And this is a time of some difficulty for all of us, and so if he can help us find our way, that's one very great help. It will have a big impact on the church and help us all to govern.
Jorge Bergoglio's strong connection with the Jewish community in Argentina may contribute to peace in the Middle East, says Augustin Ulyanovsky, leader of the Jewish youth movement in Buenos Aires.
The Pope can use his charisma and can use the relations he's developed with the Jewish community in Argentina to open a channel of dialogue, to bring an end to this conflict that is so harmful to everyone.
In the earliest hours of March the 19th, 2013, the popular enthusiasm for the first Argentine Pope swept away considerations of the past and the future. Crowds gathered in the Plaza de Mayo. In Rome, thousands massed in St. Peter's Square. The mood was festive. Jorge Bergoglio was about to become the Holy Father of the whole Roman Catholic world. It was the morning of March the 19th, 2013. Thousands were crowded into the Plaza de Mayo to watch the inauguration of the Argentinian Pope in Rome. Less than 3 weeks after his predecessor had resigned, the Roman Catholic Church had a new leader.
I think for non-Catholics or non-believers, there's a certain fascination in this 2,000-year-old institution, which in spite of all the troubles it's had through the centuries, still somehow not only survives, but continues to give that message of good news.
So we have a pope, and that's the most important thing. In our faith, you must have somebody. We've had good popes, bad popes, effective popes, ineffective popes, but you have to have a pope.
As bishop, Jorge Bergoglio was a great communicator, despite not using social media or even a computer.
He doesn't use internet. He doesn't have a laptop. He writes on an old writing machine. He doesn't tweet. But then he knows, and he said it, the importance of the media in this global world.
Pope Francis's quick wit and ability to relate to ordinary people has made him popular.
He's very frugal in his eating, very austere. And they say, if you're invited to dinner, take something with you, or you'll come away hungry.
He has the wit of the people of Buenos Aires. He's open, quick, funny, simpatico, laughs a lot. He's not solemn and not formal. This man's going to have the whole world eating out of his hand.
Despite his old-fashioned style, Pope Francis understands the need for more openness with the media.
He gave the best pieces to the media. He gave it out to the media. And at the same time, he said, look, the moment things were getting very, very dramatic, hot, he said, on my side, I had the Cardinal of Sao Paulo, Brazil, and he said, you shouldn't forget the poor. And so, the Pope says, the name Francis came to me.
The Holy Spirit of God sparked a whole movement, in this case represented by St. Francis of Assisi, which placed the Church in front of the decision to return to the poverty of the Gospel.
All that Francis means not only for the Catholics, but for the whole world. Everybody knows who Francisco de Assis or Francis of Assisi is. And the saint that believed in going back to basics and to nature and the environment.
During his first sermon, on the day of his inauguration in Rome, Pope Francis established the guiding values of his papacy. The Church and humanity, he said, are the custodians of the created universe, and, as such, are called on not only to show brotherly love, but to renew man's ties with nature.
All his first moves were, I'm the Bishop of Buenos Aires one day. It's a big urban church with a lot of challenges. I'm the bishop of this local church, Rome, with all its challenges. I can do this. He knows how to speak to people as a pastor.
Latin America as well is like the nest for populism. The narrative is we belong to the poor. We are doing everything for the poor. So if you have instead a leader that leads 1.2 billion people in the world, this is going to change the way Latin America is going to look at the church once again.
Father Gustavo Carrara, parish priest of Nuestra Señora del Pueblo, likes to think that Pope Francis will embrace the farthest outposts of Christianity as leader of the Catholic Church.
This present Pope used to speak of existential frontiers, by which I mean searching the frontier, which is something that God did. He became incarnate not in the heart of the Roman Empire, but in the farthest reaches, in a small forgotten village that no one had ever heard about.
There's a sort of return to God through Pope Francis, and this has become his mission now. So just as he would go out into the streets here, now he is going out into the world.
He's a great politician. With the church in crisis, there was a need for a great politician to lead it, to avoid the disaster it was going towards.
The church knows. The church has archives. The church has witnesses. We ask them to help us.
Now he's got to make a lot of choices about things he never had to think about much, so he needs the help of our prayer and support and all. He needs a lot of advice. But his biggest strength is, I think, his simple integrity, where, there's nothing manipulative about him or false. And that comes across, and that will give us all courage to govern well, too.
In any case, The truth should never be hidden. The truth does not offend.
The church is about keeping alive the message of Jesus Christ, which is one of love of God and mercy of God, and also giving hope and meaning to people, a hope even beyond the grave. And now people, that's good news if it's preached and witnessed to by a generous and sacrificial life. This Pope, Pope Francis, is a one who I think gives more emphasis to that by his personal witness.
On March the 19th, 2013, Jorge Mario Bergoglio was installed as the 266th Pope and Bishop of Rome. Roman Catholics the world over will remember this day as the beginning of a new era for their 2,000-year-old church, with his powerful message reaching the farthest frontiers of this global faith.